Can you hear me now? Great. Thank you, Kurt. It's good to have people that are tech wizards when you're not. I'm Carol Waddell. I am GAP pastor here at Forest Hill Church. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it means I'm the in-between person until the other in-between person comes. So temporary, short-term, part-time, that's me. But I'm so excited to be here this evening and welcome all of you to this historic event. When Forest Hill Church is leading the way in some very exciting ways in racial equity. So with that, I would love to turn it over to our MC for the evening, Mark Chupp.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. You can hear me now? So I want to start with a quote, and this is from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who said, "The case I make for reparations is virtually every institution with some degree of history in America, be it public or be it private, has a history of extracting wealth and resources out of the African American community." He goes on to describe that as theft. So we are going to unpack that tonight, and we have an amazing evening, and we've been working at this for months, and I want to introduce our committee. And so I'm going to ask our committee members from the Racial Repair and Restoration Task Force to stand, and that's Danielle Cosgrove, Marina Grant, our co-chair, with Sanjay Kanyada, Janine Gurry, Quentin Smith, and myself. And then we have, for the planning committee, and you can also stand, we have Cindy Dugan, Gordon Landefeld, Robbie Seaton, Todd, who comes all the way from North Carolina to help plan this event. And we're very grateful for all of them for helping put this together. So thank you, everybody. So you have the slides from our task force on your handouts if you can't see up here. But I want to just go over the purpose of this evening. There's twofold purposes tonight. The first is to increase our understanding of what racial reparations and the repair of historic harms means. And we're so honored to have Reverend Jermaine Ross Allen as our distinguished guest this last 2 days, and it's been wonderful. And then the second is to announce, this is that new beginning, the Racial Repair for Education Debt Program at Forest Hill Church, where we want to tonight acknowledge our complicity in perpetuating systemic racism, describe the program components, and then the application process, which we'll announce tonight, and then invite you to participate as members of this program and as ways to expand it. So we have a full agenda over the next couple hours, and we'll start with a land acknowledgement and a prayer, and then we'll have Reverend Jermaine Ross Allen speak, some question and answers, and then we'll roll out our program and have questions and answers for that, all before the end of the evening. So let's begin with a land acknowledgement. And this is something that I think is important for us to recognize on where we reside. So we acknowledge that we reside on the ancestral lands of the Lenape, or Delaware, Shawnee, Wyandot, Miami, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes tribes such as the Chippewa, Kickapoo, Wea, Pinkashaw, and Kaskaskia. This land we are on was ceded by force from the U.S. military with the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. That treaty was never honored by the United States. We are pleased that today, even though there is no official tribal status in the state of Ohio, there are nearly 28,000 Native American people who live in Northeast Ohio. They're our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates, our community members. So acknowledging our connection to these ancestors and to our Creator and to each other and to this place are all important practices in Native American traditions. So to recall this early history of this place and to recognize the peaceful indigenous people who honored this land is the least that we can do. And tonight especially we want to acknowledge that many Clevelanders reside here and did not migrate to this country, but were sons and daughters of African communities treated as property rather than as humans by those seeking to profit from the transatlantic slave trade. We recognize the power and resilience of African American communities who continue to face racial oppression today. and we commit to learn more about this history and examine our identities and take action to seek justice and healing of historic harms. And now I'm going to turn it over to my sister and friend, Ms. Sonji.
Now, all of you heard him call me a friend, so you loan money to friends, right? I'm just saying. Let's take a moment just to quiet ourselves. I know that many of you have had a long day, but just take a deep breath, and I offer this prayer. Today, we thank you for your love for us. Thank you that your love is poured into every intricate aspect of creation and released to live within our hearts here on earth. We come together as children, brothers, and sisters to lift you high over our lives. Thank you that your love can bring great change, hope, and life to all. Come, God, and awaken our spirits. May we learn and grow together as we gather today. And the people of God said, Amen.
I'm going to be owing a lot of money by the end of the night because I'm going to introduce another friend. Quentin Smith, another member of the committee, is going to have the honor of introducing our guest tonight.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everybody. I'm supposed to introduce Reverend Jermaine Ross Allen, and I'm really not going to. If you want to know about him, Google him. You'll find out all that. Rather, I wish to express gratitude for you coming to Cleveland, Ohio, to help us unveil this minor historic moment. But you did. You represent PCUSA, National PCUSA. And we were interviewed, Jermaine and our task force, by Channel 5 today. Jermaine, with your mere presence, has elevated this program to where we never could have gotten it without you. So the gratitude is sincere, and it's deep, and it's in love. And it has been a joy to be with you, to see you at St. Mark's Presbyterian, to see you at Lyndhurst, and last night, and here today. Now, you think you're going back. The question he was asked is like, who's driving me to the airport? He don't know we're kidnapping him. Like, you think you're going back? Oh, yeah. So that's the gratitude. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jermaine, who will talk.
Thank you so much, Brother Quentin, for those words of affirmation. I will try to live into that. Again, my name is Reverend Jermaine Ross Allen. I serve as the inaugural director of the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms for the Presbyterian Church USA, and it is wonderful and it is an honor to be here with all of you. And I just want to say a word of thank you in advance for all of you who are here listening, and for all of you who took the time and went through all the logistics to help me get from where I was to where I am right now. And this is a wonderful place to be, and it's great to be here. So thank you so much for your labors and for your attention to detail, because sometimes people don't pay attention to details. And the details matter. And if the details didn't matter, we wouldn't be able to enjoy how delicious, for example, this peach cobbler is, and this pasta. So I want to say thank you to the people who have made sure that we don't leave here hungry tonight. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your skills. Let's see, so where are we? In case you would like to be in touch with the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms, this is my contact information. Our wonderful administrative assistant, Melina Bennett, however, will be the first person to reply to you so that I can stay at work while we are figuring out how to be in touch and in solidarity with all of you in the work that you do. But I always like to say, I'm going to slide this around just a little bit. One of the primary roles of the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms is growing the number of human beings working to share the good news that repair and reparations make common sense for the common good as soon as possible and for as long as it takes. We stress growing the number of human beings because I probably don't have to tell you that reparations has a negative reputation in the United States as either a divisive topic or a chimerical or impossible idea. That is no accident. And so the fact that you all are here in a church gathered together to talk about reparations is actually quite a revolutionary thing for you to be doing on a Tuesday night anywhere in the United States, Cleveland especially, I would venture to say. Although I've learned this morning, thanks to your wonderful work, that Cleveland has more than a few different historical layers and a proud radical tradition as well that I think has only just begun. Albert Camus said, "Calling things by the wrong name adds to the affliction of the world." And for that reason, in just a couple of minutes, I want to explain what I think is a very important distinction between reparations with a capital R and repair or reparative justice activities. But I also will talk to you about how those two distinct things work together. Oh, I say it earlier than I thought. Okay, well, here we are. I think I say this twice, and it probably bears repeating. But typically speaking, reparationists, when we talk about reparations as a freestanding word, we are most often describing a project that is so complex that it requires an act of the federal government to do in completion. For example, land-back claims from indigenous people are not claims that can be met by your local church or your local presbytery budget. And as it turns out, those demands even exceed what is possible for cities and counties and even states. And so when we are talking about reparations for indigenous people, and when we're talking about reparations for Afro-American people, we are talking about that which must be dealt with on the level of the nation state, because the responsibility is so enormous. But at the same time, we say repair is the work of the people. And there's a certain kind of church person that when you say the work of the people, you know what I'm talking about is actually, don't be shy, the work of the people is God's work. And another way of saying that, especially in our church language, is liturgy. So the work of the people is repair, among other things. And we'll say more about that in just a moment. But repair must prepare the people to inspire the nations to make reparations their priority. Our 44th president of the United States, before everything went south, no, I'm just kidding, because they went south a little earlier. In a podcast with Bruce Springsteen after Obama's last term in office, he sat down with Bruce Springsteen to talk about why he did not support reparations during his presidency. If you're wondering why a former head of state would sit down with Bruce Springsteen to have that conversation, then we're on the same page. But Obama repeated to Bruce Springsteen on this podcast basically what he said in his memoirs, was that because of the politics of white resistance and resentment, in addition to the talk of welfare queens and the undeserving poor, all of that combined to make reparations a non-starter for Obama's presidency and something potentially, in his words, counterproductive. So when we say that repair must prepare the people to inspire, emphasis on the golden rectangle, inspire, the nations to make reparations their priority, we are acknowledging the fact that our former president probably thought more than one time about being himself an inspiring symbol with a little bit of a halo behind his head, which actually is what we photographers call a border merger. But I think that rather than a photographic mistake, the former president probably understood that he had something that made it look like he was an angel behind his head. Nevertheless, what we must do, especially as faith communities, people who are gathered to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do, it is our job, among other things, to inspire our leaders in such a way that the next Obama will have to say, instead of this, we can't get anything done unless we deal with those reparations people. Changing the conversation about what is right, necessary, and possible is squarely within the wheelhouse of people who, at least one day a week, I hope, praise God as we know God in Jesus and believe in the resurrection, believe in the virgin birth, some of us. So then how much more faith does it require of us to believe that we can repair the damage done to indigenous people and African-descended people? I think it takes a little bit less faith to believe in those things than some of the other things that we say very proudly we believe. However, we have to be very careful when we look at our leaders and we see them in one moment so excited about racial justice that they figure out a way to borrow somebody's kente cloth in order to show you just how much they love black people. We must always keep in mind that in the very next moment, that same level of enthusiasm just might be transferred to a different historic project that may or may not deserve the enthusiasm and the funding that it receives from taxpayers. So we have to be very careful, in the words of a philosopher and composer that I love very much. Do not love the moment more than you love the truth. What is repair exactly? Broadly speaking, repair is the total process of being transformed from what we have become to who we may become. And that means a transition from being colonized Christians and being colonizing Christians to becoming co-creators of God's new creation. If you remember from church or from Sunday school or just a leisurely day reading your scripture, that one of the primary functions of the transformative power of God's Holy Spirit is not simply to make little minor reforms here and there. It's not to say clever things about how the moral arc of the universe bends, but it is to be expectant that God will perform transformation, not only on you as an individual, but on what reality looks like as a result of you being transformed in this world right now. But we have to transition from being colonized Christians and colonizing Christians. And I want to say just a little bit about that. And I'm going to read through this a little bit quickly so that we don't waste our time and so I don't lose you, because if you didn't skip the ending of your cobbler, then I know that your ability to pay attention is going to taper off. So I'm not going to give you a lot of prose to read through. But I want to start with some things that were common sense, common knowledge in the 19th century, because I want us to have a historical method this evening to understand part of who we have become in our spiritual imaginations as a result of the fact that we have been colonized Christians and colonizing Christians. And so I'll begin with words from Matthew Carey, who was a political economist from the early part of the 19th century. And I just realized, even as I said his name, you probably don't need to know his name, but I want you to pay attention to what he said when he was trying to persuade people not to try to rethink the Missouri Compromise or the effort to blend slavery and freedom in perpetuity in the United States. He thought the blend of slavery and freedom was perfect. He didn't want people to rethink it, and so he said, the freedom and comfort of the African race are certainly objects worthy a strenuous effort to obtain, but if they are to be bought at the expense of the peace and happiness of this country, the price is too great. I want you to think along with me, and I'm assuming a whole lot of things about people's religious experience or affiliation or whatever. I want you to think along with me what the Apostle Paul says in the book of Romans, chapter 12. I don't remember the verse. But the Apostle Paul recommends that you offer your body as a living sacrifice. Implication being not other people's bodies as a living sacrifice. I want you to think about what has this nation taught itself about itself regarding what it takes to hold the nation together. And as Christians who have an image of Christ on the cross in your minds, I want you to think about the contrast between who Jesus was and what his being made Jesus do. How does that conflict with a nation's self-understanding about who must be sacrificed in order to keep us together? Think about that. Because as we contemplate who we have become and who, in the light of the power of the Holy Spirit, we may become, we have to ask critical questions about what the nation has taught us about what unity requires. And so again, the freedom and the comfort of the African race are certainly objects worth a strenuous effort to obtain, but if they are to be bought at the expense of the peace and happiness of this country, the price is too great. And of course, note that he said this before the peace and the happiness of this country met the Civil War. Another thinker said the following: in all social systems, there must be a class to do the menial duties, to perform the drudgery of life. That is, a class requiring but a low order of intellect and but little skill. Its requisites are vigor, docility, fidelity. Such a class you must have, or you will not have that other class that leads to progress, or that leads progress rather, civilization and refinement. That class constitutes the very mudsill of society and of political government, meaning simply the bottom. Mudsill, and I don't know construction terminology and history very well, but it represents the very bottom upon which the rest of an edifice rests. You might as well attempt to build a house in the air as to build either one or the other except on this mudsill. Fortunately for the South, she found a race adapted to that purpose to her hand. We are old-fashioned at the South, yet slave is a word discarded now by polite ears. I will not characterize that class at the North by that term, but you have it. There it is, hint, hint. It is everywhere, it is eternal. That is from a speech called Cotton is King by Senator James Henry Hammond before the U.S. Senate in 1858. This was not an obscure person, and he was not speaking in an obscure manner, but he was trying to state what would sound comforting and familiar and practical to his listeners. Another person says, when we are free from this plague spot of slavery, and I want you to hear the motivation here, when we are free from this plague spot of slavery, the curse to our industry, our education, our politics, our religion, we shall increase more rapidly in number and still more abundantly be rich. Then, by peaceful purchase, the Anglo-Saxon may acquire the rest of this North American continent. Then, what a nation we shall one day become. America, the mother of 1,000 Anglo-Saxon states on both sides of the equator and count her children at last by hundreds of millions, and among them all, behold, no tyrant and no slave, from Unitarian minister Theodore Parker. Again, keep in mind, he was interested in getting rid of slavery as a moral stain on the nation. He did not talk about multi-ethnic democracy. As part of one nation, this is Abraham Lincoln speaking in a campaign speech. As part of one nation, its people now find and may forever find their way to Europe by New York, to South America and Africa by New Orleans, and to Asia by San Francisco. But separate our common country into two nations as designed by the present rebellion, and every man of this great interior region is thereby cut off from some one or more of these outlets, not perhaps by a physical barrier, but by embarrassing and onerous trade relations. Abraham Lincoln addressing Congress in 1862. Addition, after emancipation from slavery, Albion Tourget, who you may know as the lawyer who argued on the African American side against Plessy versus Ferguson's desire to reinstate black codes and legal segregation. Unfortunately, Tourget lost. He was a great lawyer with a great argument, but he lost, and we had separate but equal for almost 100 years afterward. But even Albion Tourget, a great friend of the freed person, had the following to say about reparations. He told ex-slaves that slavery opened to the slave not only the pathway of civilization, but the gate of heaven. Reparations demands would jeopardize civil rights for Afro-Americans. Reparations demands nourish, he said, a sense of injustice and ingratitude that distracts from the cheerful recognition of the liberated slaves' true status and their duties of citizenship. This was written, I believe, on the 10th anniversary of the emancipation without compensation. He was generous in his assumption that playing nice and looking forward would secure civil rights. But I don't have to tell you all that even today, these very same civil rights he was describing have yet to be secured, although reparations have not been given or properly agitated for yet anyway. Fast forward, one of our very own Presbyterian theologians, Gayrod Wilmer, helps us, I believe, think about what might be amiss in our theological imagination such that we do not pursue reparations or advocate for the pursuit of reparations in earnest as Christian communities. Let's see. I don't want to read all of what he said, although I highly recommend reading anything Gayrod Wilmer wrote when you have the time to do so. He discussed racism, however, as a permanent and demonic distortion of our humanity. And he raised the fact that many people consider that racism belongs to original sin and is a part of the principalities and powers which the ministry of Jesus and the whole New Testament stands against as the whole creation awaits the final consummation of God's purposes. This all sounds like very good and standard church teaching, but I want you to think about what does it mean if we associate racism with original sin. Most Christians, I believe, do not hold to a belief that there is a solution to original sin outside of the second coming of Jesus, dwelling in a disembodied state in heaven, perhaps. But you might raise the question, why should relief from the legacies of racism wait until a time period to occur that when you really press progressive and liberal modern Christians on the matter, they might tell you they don't actually believe in that time period anyway. Nevertheless, some of our most progressive Christians, I believe, are still straddling the line between things that they perhaps don't believe all the way and the things that make it easy to get works published with certain conservative or middle-of-the-road Christian publishers. Writers that otherwise have very helpful things to say, like Jennifer Harvey, said the following thing, and I just want us to take it in and ask us, where does this leave communities struggling for repair of historic harms? Harvey says this: I watch white students breathe a huge sigh of relief and realize not only can they talk about race and own our racial history, but it's liberating to do so. And we're very happy for their feeling of liberation. It feels good to feel like you can set things right, even if that's going to be a long-term, imperfect process. We will never set things right in this country, but the work of doing it is very liberating. I don't know about you, but this gives me pause when I think about our coworkers in justice working on something that they believe will never set things right, but it's liberating for them personally to attempt it. Another author, Jamar Tisby, in an otherwise somewhat useful book, The Color of Compromise, says that though the work of racial justice is difficult and will never truly end in this life, God has provided a colorful portrait of the goal. Let's read that sentence again. Though the work of racial justice is difficult and will never truly end, and note that he doesn't say in this lifetime. He says in this life, as if he's referring to another one. I'll let you wrestle with that. God has provided a colorful portrait of the goal. So this is something within our Christian teaching, even among some of our most progressive thinkers who either because of the politics of publication or because of their sincere beliefs cannot imagine that solutions to historic harms actually exist in this life, which raises a few questions. I'll say the polite church ones out loud. It raises the question, is there a problem in the way that Christian communities think about reality? And does that problem put the pressure and put the pain and put the legacy of those harms onto the very people that we say are our sisters and our brothers in Christ? We have to be very careful when we are trying to thread the needle and play to a wide audience. Trust me, I know. There are some ideas that we must tolerate among one another, and there are some ideas whose time have come to be placed on the chopping block. And when we have an idea about God in which it appears to us that the creations of white people are somehow co-eternal with God's power to transform, then we may not really quite understand what our actual religious commitment actually is. We have to raise that question, both in public in terms of action, but also in terms of our private spiritual lives, so that the transformative power of God can overpower the limitations of Christian teaching. Reparations for African American people must be community specific. What do I mean by that? When we talk about reparations, we cannot talk about reparations for oppressed people, people of color, minoritized individuals, black and brown individuals. I mean, I've heard so many of the words, and BIPOC, which I think is going by the wayside. All of these terms distract us from the fact that true repair and reparations must be targeted to the historical facts experienced by people struggling to recover from legacies of historic harm. That means that the people of Haiti who are calling right now for reparations from France are calling on the right perpetrator, although they may need to add one perpetrator. I'm thinking about the past 3 weeks, maybe they need to add 2 additional perpetrators. But it's important for us to realize that, because only a nation state can truly pay capital R reparations. And that means that the people in Fiji Islands and elsewhere in the South Pacific who have experienced historic harms because of weapons testing, their reparations need to come from the United States and other nations who have perpetuated those harms, even as those people calling for reparations from various Caribbean nations are making that call to the British, to the French, to the Spanish, to the Dutch, And people in various parts of Africa are calling on those same parties, including Namibia and others who are calling on the Germans for reparations. That level of specificity is a precondition for the kinds of targeted solidarities that you are about to hear about right now. For churches right here in Cleveland to understand that there are works of repair that are due, for example, to African American women who don't need to be saddled with debt as they complete their education. That is an example of the respect for cultural specificity that is required to do the genuine work of repair. Also, reparations, as I said earlier, those are required to repair damages far beyond what any church denomination or even a state, county, or corporation is able to or even willing to repair on its own. So William Darity, well-known economist and reparations advocate, says quite astutely, if not terribly kindly, that local reparations are an oxymoron. That's a useful thing to say, not terribly encouraging for people on the local level. But the truth in what he is saying is that we cannot deceive ourselves in order to think that the state of California, who's already shown that they're not serious, they never had the money in the first place in their operating state budget to do reparation for even one of the groups that have been harmed in the course of that state's normal business. So we must, again, do the local work that we can do to be transformed. But that transformation must include the knowledge that we must also join the national call for reparations, even as you create a brilliant witness right here tonight by showing up and support the reparative justice activities that signal a change of opinion from where we left off with former President Barack Hussein Obama. Our Center for the Repair of Historic Harms employs what we refer to as a call and response repair ethic. What that simply means is that no one can define for another community what repairs are required in order for that community to move into its preferred future. And we're inspired to take this position by the Caribbean Community of States, also known as CARICOM, which says that victims and their descendants have a duty. I like that word, because it kind of cures that victim complex that you might otherwise develop. Victims and their descendants have a duty to call for reparatory justice. Their call for justice is the basis of the closure they seek to the terrible tragedies that engulfed humanity during modernity. Reparations for indigenous nations, however, are distinct from what is being called for in terms of reparations for Afro-Americans. Indigenous nations call for reparations around the areas of recognition as sovereign nations. Our indigenous friends tell us constantly we are not minority groups, we are not ethnicities, we are nations. And as nations, they demand sovereign to sovereign relations with the United States government, and that's important. And they also call for land return in many cases, recognition of indigenous jurisdiction in civil and criminal law, language revitalization, and the repatriation of ancestors' remains from boarding schools and other properties formerly run by Presbyterians, Lutherans, Catholics, Episcopalians, and more. I want to say thank you very much for listening, because I know that this topic is not an easy topic. I know most people do not come to church to hear about reparations and colonization, but I'm extraordinarily happy to see all of you here, because this affirms me in my conviction that the Christian people in the United States in the year 2024 are about to begin something that is better than anything that we have seen in Christianity in this land and in this land in general ever before. So thank you for your patience, thank you for your tenacity, and thank you for your willingness to turn a new corner.
Wow. That's enough to sit with for a little while, isn't it? We have a full program. We had talked about having a few questions at this point. Maybe just one comment or question, and then we're going to go on and we can have some more at the end because we do have a full program. Nathaniel.
Where should we be at this time? Where should we be at this time from your perspective with reparations?
All right, short answer, important question. Right now, we should have strong congressional support for a bill to pass, or at the very least, study reparations. Right now, we do not have that. We have lost Representative John Conyers recently. Not so recently, but in recent memory. He was the first major champion for reparations. Then the mantle was passed to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who has also passed away. Then the mantle came to Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, who, thanks to many things, but especially money from AIPAC, have lost their seats. And as a result, we have some things that symbolize racial progress, but we don't have actual support for a bill for reparations. We should have that now, but because of untimely death and corruption and money in politics, we don't have that. The Black Congressional, I'm forgetting the name of the Black, thank you. They are timid to support this, and that's why I emphasize that we have yet to properly inspire our leaders to prioritize reparations. So where we are now is in the position for those of you here to talk to your relatives, talk to your friends, talk to your parishioners, and increase the numbers of human beings sharing the good news that repair and reparations is common sense for the common good. So once we gather those numbers, our representatives will then say, we have to deal with this now. The people are calling for it. So we should be close to that now, but we're not. But I believe that if we get our act together, we can get far beyond where we are now much quickly than many people believe. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Like I said, hopefully we'll have more time in a little bit. So now we're going to turn to our program, and Janine Gurry is going to lead us in the first part of setting the context for how this program came about.
So, as Presbyterians in this house of worship, we move from the curiosity of the intellect. And if we're prayerful, there is a dropping that occurs into the wisdom of our hearts. And when that happens, it moves us to action. And it's action that we find in our hands, in our feet, moving towards meaningful change. Racism took root because it benefited those in power. Once established, it was reinforced by the laws and the cultural beliefs over time. Forest Hill Church was no different. It was built on land with restrictive deeds, reflecting our legacy. By acknowledging the past, we can better understand the present and break the cycle. In so doing, we create space for meaningful change and for healing.
So where are we at as a congregation? Just so you know, many of you are from the Forest Hill Church, but for those who are not, we have a long history of being committed to social justice and to work in the community around that theme. In 2010, as a wake-up call, we were focused on an incident that occurred with two of our young black youth from the congregation, but that led us to not focusing on what happened to them outside the community, but what it's like to be a member of this church as a black family or as a black person. So that call led to the formation in 2010 of the Race Core Team, and over a decade of work of looking at ourselves and examining racial equity. We went through a program called PRISM. We had facilitators come in. We did a self-assessment. We did a number of things to work at that. And that eventually we had the formation of Racial Equity Buddies, the Ron Register Scholarship Fund, but eventually that led us to this point here. And so in 2022, in April, the Ministry of Justice and Mission chose to formed a racial inequity repair committee and submitted that to the church leadership, a proposal to initiate a racial repair program. And that program then was decided in October of that same year in 2022 that we would begin a racial repair program. And there was actually funding set aside by the Ministry of Justice and Mission of $9,000 and then another $10,000 from our community grant program to come up with $19,226 to be set aside, with $10,000 a year committed to that after that. So the Racial Repair and Restoration Task Force, which I introduced earlier, was created in 2022, and we have been working pretty persistently. We've probably had 75 meetings since that time. We meet every week in preparation for coming here. So really the point I want to leave, building on what Janine said, is we had to look at ourselves and say, how are we complicit? How are we taking responsibility? It's not enough to study. It's not enough to donate. We have to take this very seriously and put ourselves into the game.
In so doing, we created a trinity of racial healing. This emblem really spoke to us. It energized us. It moved us forward. It recognizes acknowledgement, which truly means recognizing the truth. Repentance involves turning away actions and a turning toward the embrace of growth and love. And finally, repair, recognizing that the work of mending what is broken is critical in our process. At the end of the day, all three of these are in motion at all times in this congregation.
So now we'll give you a little context of why education debt was the focus. The first, and you have these slides, the first slide simply indicates that we all talk about inflation now, but the reality is that tuition inflation has been going on, and over the last 25 years, it has dramatically outpaced wages, and so that people's tuition is way outpacing their ability to pay back, and that's due in large part to lack of federal and state support for higher education. This chart tells you a little bit more about the breakdown by race and ethnicity. And so for black borrowers of higher education, the debt is much higher, and it's highest among black women of 37,558 compared to black men of 35,665, higher than any other group. But that's not enough. The other piece of that, these top two figures talk about the average amount black borrowers take out compared to the average amount that white borrowers take out, with about a $10,000 difference. But the underlying really significant piece we have to look at is that overall 2.9% of wealth is held by black households compared to 86% held by white households. So there's not only just an income gap and a borrower's gap, there's a wealth gap as well. And when we look at the landscape of student loan debt, black borrowers have less capacity to pay back, and so they're more likely to have current debt or be behind in debt, and also have a smaller percentage of debt paid off. And in many cases, the debt actually is higher than when they took out the loans because of the way the system is structured. So that has created a tremendous shortfall. And We focused on black female student debt because of this disparity in income. 4 years after graduation, we know that the black borrower owes $53,000, while the average white borrower owes $28,000. And for women, it's even higher. And college-educated black women earn 10% less than college-educated white women and 34% less than college-educated white men. And then finally, the Roosevelt Institute study showed that canceling of $50,000 on student loan debt per borrower would actually increase immediately the wealth of black Americans by 40%. The other piece that we looked at was, I'll just put a word in about this, is housing. So we know that owning a home is the single greatest way of building wealth in this country. If you are saddled with college debt, you cannot afford to pay a mortgage. You're paying a college loan instead of a mortgage. And so that's why we focused on black females in Cleveland Heights.
So yes, you may know that there is a federal student loan debt elimination program, and this is it's a current program that's currently happening that allows people who work in nonprofit or government jobs, employees, to have their federal student loans canceled after 10 years of on-time payments. Unfortunately, though, this is still a really big burden. For those 10 years, that still impacts your ability to buy a home and maybe have a child or get married, all these other different things. So it really doesn't help you, help students in the, graduates in the moment. It really takes a long time in order to get to that point. And then a federal court issued an injunction on other potential federal student loan forgiveness programs, unfortunately.
Bring it down a little bit. As you have heard, as Mark mentioned a little bit earlier, we did get initial money from the church, and then this past year, session voted to give us additional $10,000, and we're hoping that that will be each year. What are the other possibilities for funding? One, free will offerings. And we've talked about, we do other free will offerings during the year. Possibly doing free will offerings sometime during the year. Also, we heard before, and some of you may have heard this before, the copyright rights for gospel music. Possibly every time we sing a gospel song, there is a certain amount of money that is set aside to go into that fund just for that reason. Approaching the presbytery, and we did learn in the last few months that there is a fund with the presbytery called the Vision Fund that we will be looking into shortly to see about getting additional funds for our program. Session requirements. Definitely a commitment to racial healing that requires continuous engagement in the areas of acknowledgement, repentance, and repair. Responsibility to this program that is owned by Session and given to a ministry to oversee. Yearly conversation to determine the financial commitment with a recommendation of $12,000. In the past, we've asked for 10. We've been very happy with that. We understand that for our church and most churches, there's always a financial problem. We have operating budgets that we have to adhere to. We also know that in many congregations, and ours is no different, there's a dwindling population. So, but we are hoping that not only does this money come from Session, we're hoping that this congregation will think at some point that this program is one that we want to be a part of. And I think that we have certainly gotten contributions from this congregation this past year. I hope that we will think that this is something that we want to continue and that we want to be a part of. Thank you.
As Sonji comes up, I just want to emphasize the point that I think you made, Reverend Germain, that this is a responsibility. It's not a gift. It's not a donation. And so we worked very hard with the session, the leadership body, the decision-making body of this congregation, that this is a congregational commitment. It's not something that people are doing as a voluntary gift to the congregation. Although those are welcome.
We're not going to turn down any money. How unusual. I have to say, I am so excited to be a part of this initiative. But more importantly, I am so proud of Forest Hill. I think that we are one of the few churches, I mean, you did mention one, but we won't go there, in the nation that's taking this initiative. I think that we all need to just give ourselves a pat on the back. We thought long and hard, and we really prayed on it. I mean, we prayed on it in terms of who do we give this money to, and what we looked at, what is going to make the greatest impact on this community that has a history of inequality. And that was the decision to actually pay the loan of an African-American female. Now, I did try and put my name in the hat, but they said there would be some issue with that. I do have debt. I am an African-American. I mean, I thought I met all the criteria, but anyway, I don't want to go there. But we believe that this will make the greatest impact on our community, because that woman, you're going to allow her to change her life. You're going to give her the freedom to actually get the type of housing that she deserves, the type of job she deserves, but more importantly, it's going to create generational wealth. She's going to be able to educate her children in the way that she wants to and desires to. So that gift doesn't stop with her, but it goes to her children, her grandchildren, and the children beyond. Because many of us are in a position where our parents did not have that to give us. They didn't have that type of legacy to give us. And that's what we're doing for, this is the first female, but this is our start. And I remember we had a session here, and sometimes problems can be seen just overwhelming. But he said you take, the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And so we have to approach this as one bite at a time. And this is why we chose an African-American female that lives in Cleveland Heights, that she has, that she's already finished her first degree, but this will allow her to go on, and it could be Dr. somebody, and her children to have that type of opportunity. So I'm excited. I'm excited that this program will go forward and that we will make a huge change, and not just the life of the female, but the life of her family.
How to get involved, how you can get involved. The bottom line is, whoops. I'm skipping that. I want to talk about what you can do and what we need to do. We need you. We need your wisdom. We need your energy. We need your ideas. We need you to help motivate others and join us. As important as that is, we understand that we need to move beyond the walls of Forest Hill Church, that we need to engage the broader community, the church community, civic organizations. This is but one step, landing on the moon. One small step for man, one large step for mankind. What we have done is truly historic. It is the first racial repair program in the presbytery. It's the first racial repair in the county. And I believe it's the first racial repair in the state. The question is there commitment to keep it going, to grow it? And we have to answer that affirmatively. And the question becomes, well, how do you do it? There's any number of ways. Obviously, we need money, but we need people to join with us. If you're interested at all, you know who we are. Stop one of us before you leave. Say, I want to be involved in the task force. Because, again, we want to move it beyond Forest Hill Church. Do you have a church that might be willing to help? It may not be able to give $10,000. It may not be able to give $1,000. But can it give $500? What can the church do? What can you do? Just have to. You have to get involved. Otherwise, we would have done something remarkable. But boy, we have planted a seed. We have planted a seed. And that seed has grown to be this little flower that has budded. The question is, can we plant more seeds? Can we do more than one or two black women? And the only way that's going to be possible and feasible is if other churches join. You know, and it doesn't have to be a Forest Hill initiative. It's a racial repair initiative. So the presbytery, you know, we're in the presbytery. It would sure be nice if some of the churches in the presbytery said, you know what? We want to at least talk about it with you. But if they don't, we'll go without them. We're going to move. We're going to move. And we're asking you to join us. So that's my statement.
Well, I have two things, but the first thing, some of you probably had heard that we were doing an ideation session. We decided to postpone it. So it is now going to be on November 9th, 11 to 1:30 at North Church, which is at the Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries on Superior Avenue. The ideation session is basically for people who, not so much for this church, but those of you who are here who are not members of this church, and who have started a repair program, or who are thinking about the idea of maybe wanting to start one. And even for members here, if you have other friends who maybe you had a conversation with and talked to them about what we're doing here, and they might be interested, have them come to our ideation session. It's going to be headed by Janine and Mark, and they're going to talk about starting one, getting ideas if you're doing one to share. So that's something coming up. Right now, I am moved to ask Scott Peters if he would come to the microphone. He has something that he would like to share with this congregation.
Good evening. I want to thank the members of the Racial Repair and Restoration Committee, Sanjay, Marina, Janine, Danielle, Mark, and Quinton, for their foresight and commitment to bringing Reverend Jermaine Ross Alam to Cleveland to kick off the church's new beginning, the Racial Repair for Educational Debt Program. I also want to commend our session for its courage and commitment to racial equity work and promoting justice throughout the church and our surrounding community. In answer to Quinton's question, what can we do? Tonight I'm pleased to announce on behalf of my mother, Rosamond Peters, and the Peters family that we're making a gift of $10,000 to support Forest Hill Church's educational equity program. This contribution is made in memory of my father, Graham Peters, who passed away last month, who was a devoted member of the church for 66 years. As longtime residents of Forest Hill community and members of this church, we recognize the importance of having all members of the church contribute to the process of repair. We thank the Racial Repair and Restoration Task Force for their guidance, wisdom, and inspiration in proposing this bold initiative. My father moved to Forest Hill community in the early 1950s. As a teenager, he searched for a religious and spiritual home and was drawn to the vibrancy of FHC. Later, he convinced his parents to join the church. Throughout his life, my father served this church in various capacities as an elder, a member of the Board of Trustees, and its longtime treasurer. Both my father and my mother have been actively involved in and supportive of FHC's social mission. As such, the Educational Equity Program's goal of creating greater financial equity for our Black female college graduates aligns well with their lifelong commitment and advocacy for the value and power of education. As a family with deep roots in this community, we hope this contribution helps to firmly establish the Racial Repair for Educational Debt Program as a central commitment of Forest Hill Church for years to come and inspires others to join in this crucial endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited about that. Thank you, Scott, and to your family. It also sends a message about what responsibility looks like, and so thank you for doing that. So at this time, we do have time for some questions, and then we will have a celebration. So we have a hand in the back, and I think Kurt has a microphone. And that can be for the committee or for Reverend Jermaine. Yes, you've been hearing about that cobbler. So our speaker got to eat that first, and I just noticed they slipped him a second one. So but after the discussion is celebration, and it's back there waiting for us. So don't go away. All right, go ahead and introduce yourself and where you're from, and ask your question.
Bob Fleming. I'm from Pioneer Memorial Presbyterian in Solon. On federal student loan debt elimination. And I know there's been an attempt to have more student debt eliminated. The main objection I've heard to that is that it's not fair for these people to get their debt eliminated when all those people in the past have had to pay their debt. And therefore, since it's unfair to them, then we should not give it to anybody else. So, and this is like a national response for those people who are against it. So my question is, what would be a response we could make that could possibly change their minds?
I hope that I got the gist of your question, although I have to admit I was still contemplating cobbler. But did you, what I think I heard you say is that there is a national argument out there saying that other people have had to pay their debts. Why select one group of people to forgive their debt and not others? I think that it's wise to consider that question because it's a real question. But I think the statement about the proper manner to go about eating an elephant is instructive. Somebody has to start somewhere, one bite at a time. I think we have to take that argument to heart because if I think back toward what people refer to as the slaveholder's dilemma, it helps me put it in context. There are a group of people who once said that you cannot have progress, well, we said it tonight, unless somebody occupies the bottom. And there is a subtle comment where he said it's not polite to use the term slave for basically the same thing that takes place by another name in the northern states. I'm from Texas, so I point north as if right now I'm not in the north. What that means is that despite the fact that indigenous people and African Americans have been exploited the most, it doesn't change the fact that our system is one that is based on the exploitation of people who have to work for a living. And so I hope that the question about what about the rest of the people is not someone's way of missing the point, but that it serves as an invitation for us to realize that whether you're dealing with the legacies of chattel slavery or the legacies of wage slavery, that there are people who have more to deal with than others, and there are others who have more to deal with than what is just. And if those two groups of people find a way to carry that burden together until they can eliminate that burden and the source of that burden, then I think we have a lot more work to do. So I would say, for those people saying it's unfair, I would say you're partly correct. What can we do to make this fair? It's not by taking away from someone what they receive when somebody finally wakes up to the reality of abundance. But it's to say we've started here, and thank you for indicating where we should go next. And we should say also, and we're sorry for taking this long to wake up to the reality that more than 3 groups in this country have been given burdens and debts beyond what is necessary and beyond what is just. But I do think saying that this is a beginning and that balancing affairs for all people who work for a living must be our main goal. I'll just admit to you, I'm a social ethicist, and that means I come from a long tradition of people who believe society has a structure, but that structure can be adjusted toward evil or it can be adjusted toward good. I happen to believe that it's a sin to make profits without sharing those profits. Some people may call me the S word. I wear it proudly. But this very sense that you have to go into debt in order to work, it makes no sense, especially for our teachers, especially for our healers, especially for the people who do the things that we can't do without. You shouldn't have to go into any debt to be educated to serve the public or to serve God or to serve humanity. So I think when people say, well, hey, what about me? It's important. I used to say, that's just your white privilege talking. But now that I have a responsible position where I'm supposed to be growing the number of people, it means that we need to say, yes, you are correct. And I think that's important. So it's not one or the other, but it's to say perhaps you're next.
A question came, how do I apply? And we actually have the answer, and we forgot that in our presentation.
So the application went live, is going live today, and we have flyers that if anyone wants to take one, that's great. And there is a QR code and a link that you can follow to access the application. So yeah, please spread this far and wide to folks that you know. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So it's the application for folks to yeah, and we'll send it out through Forest Hill, so people can just forward it on through email. We do not have a deadline. We have not set that yet.
Rolling application.
So right now it's rolling applications and, yeah.
Well, we're just letting them go now, so we're not going to cut it off tomorrow. And we'll have to see what response we get before we say we want to stop.
Asia.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Reverend Jermaine, for coming. I wanted to touch on something that you said about reparations being community specific. And my question is to the task force, how many black women between the ages of 18 and 39 did you speak with when coming up with this process?
I don't think we spoke to any particular.
Your granddaughter.
Here.
I'm sorry?
Oh,
Wasn't your?
yeah,
Huh?
I thought it was Sonji or Marina's granddaughter that talked to you.
of course I do.
I don't think we spoke to any particular demographic as much as we researched the data, and that we did. And then, of course, we had our own personal experiences, meaning many of us have children that are still in debt, but what really drove it was the data, the educational data, and additionally, that there was no program like this. Just doesn't exist.
So I want to push back on that and say that there are educational debt canceling programs for black women all throughout the country. But my follow-up question to you is, if you didn't talk to anyone between the ages of 18 and 39, how do you know that what they want is their student debt relief? Because I can tell you as a 39-year-old that what keeps me up at night is not my student loan bills. It's the groceries I can't afford. So I'm not against this program, and I'm not against Forest Hill doing something. I'm just asking, how do you determine for someone else what the right thing is if you haven't talked to them?
Once again, it was the national data that we took a look at, and our task force looked at the data, and we really the decision was housing or education debt. And we realized that there were a lot of housing programs, and so we went with education. Marina?
Let me say, yes, we did.
Okay.
I have 3 grandchildren, 3 granddaughters, and they fall into that age category. And each one of them said, if they could get rid of their education debt,
That
how
would be
much
their number
farther
one
they
priority.
would be. So we didn't stand out on the corner and ask for a number of people. But I, for one, as a member of this committee, can speak to on that subject. There are students out there of that age range, and if they can get rid of their student debt, that means there's so many other things that they could do.
And I agree with that, and I understand that. I'm just wondering if I guess what I'm asking is this a done deal, or are you willing to talk to more people about where this money goes?
It's announced, I think the program is announced and it's launched. There's no reason why racial repair couldn't include other things. I think just the other point that I would add to what Quentin said is that, and I talked to college graduates with that as well, black females, and one of the things, 2 things that came up is one who had their 10-year process and had their loan forgiven. I talked to them the week that it was forgiven, and how hard it was, and how many people they knew that were eligible that did not get the debt canceled because they missed a payment, there was, between jobs or whatever. And so there was this huge need. And then the other thing that those folks said, which is also supported by the data, is that we are trying to address a structural problem, which is the lack of wealth creation among black women. And so meeting other needs of those folks doesn't really meet the needs of wealth creation. And there are housing assistance programs, but like I said before, you could get down payment assistance, but if you're paying a huge amount of debt every month. You can't pay a mortgage and that debt at the same time. So, so that was part of the conversation. We talked to people and we took the data and it was really focused on the structural aspect of that and trying to do wealth creation.
Okay, and then I just have one more question. Please indulge me. I'm sorry. One more, just one more. Will this money go to the student or former student, or will it go to the institution?
Yeah, Marina, you want to talk to that?
And that's it. I'm giving the mic.
It will go to the institution, and we've also, you want to speak to it, Marina? We'll also made sure that we've done the research that in the state of Ohio, that will not be considered income that they have to pay tax on. And that's partly why we're doing it that way.
Hi, Mark. Thanks to the committee. I appreciate all of your hard work and research. I had a question about the finance side. Obviously, there's a limited amount at the moment, and you're looking at applications. Is the amount that will be gifted determined? Is that to be determined? And then sustaining the fund, was there a conversation beyond, once that money is donated, replenishing it yearly? Is there a threshold you're looking to set up like an endowment? Just curious about those future plans.
All of the above. We'll take it all. This slide talks about it. The debt that we're looking at is between $35,000 and $75,000, and that was based on average debt that there is and not having so much debt that the young person, the applicant, we wouldn't be able to pay it off. And so this seemed like a reasonable amount within the range of what an average debt is. And so, and the idea is once that's paid off, we will then move to another applicant. And it could be that if there's enough funds, we could do rolling. We could have paying off one at an annual basis and starting a new person as well. So as for endowment, yes, that would be very important. So. Yeah. That means what? They'll get it until their loan is paid off. Well, the question was, will they get that money for 10 years? They'll get whatever amount we can afford to pay them until the debt is paid. If we have an applicant who has a $36,000 debt, we have $36,000. We'll pay that off and we'll start another application. If the person has a $75,000 debt, we won't be able to pay that off for a few years.
I just want to make a comment, and it's generated by the gentleman's comment over here about fairness. There seems to me, if this is an elephant in the room, what's larger than an elephant? There's a dinosaur that I don't know how we discuss it. We are a small group. But I think the example of Georgetown a few years ago, where they used their money to admit to some of the egregious things they had done as far as slavery. If we were to tap into or have universities, two things. Number one, challenge universities about the cost of education. And the second thing, if you looked at the endowment, and this is not an original thought, if you looked at the endowment of some of the universities, especially the Ivies, they could settle all, forget the government, forget doing the little stuff that the government and struggling about who do we pay, who do we not pay. Harvard University, I would imagine, with their endowment, could pay off all of the debt in this country. All of the wealthy people who are building buildings in their own honor. And I have relatives who are going to those buildings as we speak. But to me, that there is a dinosaur that we need to start eating, which is challenging why this situation exists. And it's kind of like reparations. We know why, but that's not, we're going with the little bites instead of the big gulps. So I just think that there's, it's not, maybe it's not this organization, maybe that's too big for us, but there has to be at some point a discussion about why we are costing young people, and especially in some universities where the curriculum, the first 2 years doesn't even involve anything that they're going to be doing when they're in the work situation. So, I'm saying that only because when we talk about fairness, money is money, but there's a lot of money that we don't touch because it's sacred, and that's university money.
Yeah. I agree, 100%. And one of the takeaways for me tonight is this slide from Reverend Jermaine, Repair must prepare people to inspire the nations to make reparations their priority. And I would add to that, to large institutions to make repair. This is so symbolic. We're only able to address the needs of one person at a time right now, but this is a huge problem, and it should start consciousness raising about institutions, our institutions in our own community, institution I work for. All of these need to be challenged. You want to add to it?
No, I just want to say, that you're right though, Pat. It goes to what Reverend Jermaine was saying. What Reverend Jermaine was saying, you need a groundswell. You need to begin, and in the beginning, then you have to grow it. But if you're just going to call on people to do things as opposed to doing what you can, you got to build. You got to build. We have to build that groundswell that emanates beyond our church all the way through the nation, but it's a groundswell, you know? So that's what I think. We'll go to Marcy.
Just a quick note for all of us with our language as we talk about this. In my second grade classroom, if one of my students steals something from somebody else and I demand that they give it back, we don't call it a gift. We don't call it a donation. You give it back and you say you're sorry. And so we need to be really careful in our language that this is not a gift, this is not a donation, this is a repair, just as we're moving forward to watch ourselves.
Yes. And we've heard from Reverend Jermaine speak to that this week, and I don't know if you want to add anything, but I can say it, but you can say it much better.
Yeah, I'd just like to, affirm that comment and thank you. It's one of those things that is kind of between like, things are going well, maybe name that thing later. But since you named it, I think it's helpful to say that I'm a volunteer in an organization that determined how to deal with this verb. At Restorative Actions, we call what people do as surrendering the wealth that they realize they have gained from a system where others' hard work did not amount to the same thing. So it's difficult, but theologically it's important not to confuse being a debtor with being a creditor. We'll put it that way. And those of us who understand that reparation is the right thing to do, kind of, we cringe when people fancy themselves as, oh, I'm a philanthropist, or I'm a giver, or I'm investing, or this, that, and the other. We know what you all mean in this room with that language, so it's not necessary to act as if you don't know. But moving forward, and as people continue to talk, we want to be careful that we don't send the wrong signal to the philanthropy class to think that this is another opportunity to show up as a good person giving out of your excess without giving witness to the historical fact that perhaps individuals in this room are not the perpetrators of crimes, but we are, in many cases, the recipients of other people's ill-gotten gains. And so to pay attention to what verbs we use helps to be a witness, so that as people hear what we intend to say when we decide that we are presenting a reparative offering or that we are surrendering funds, people might say, oh, why do you say it like that? And that becomes an opportunity to say that once upon a time people believed it was impossible to begin to heal from these harms, but now we find it's possible and we want to submit ourselves, or we want to surrender ourselves, or we want to offer what we have as a way to heal. And that helps our language signal to people, oh, something different is happening, but the people saying it, and people are doing it, they look like nice people. They look like they have friends. I might be one of them. So thank you for raising that.
That was so well stated. I thought we should end on that, but we'll let Derry have the last word.
This is a very quick and practical question. I would like to make a contribution to this fund, and there may be other people in the room also. If I write out a check to Forest Hill Church, what do I put on the check to make sure it goes to that fund?
So all checks can be made payable to Forest Hill Church with racial repair in the memo line.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. I would like to, is there another comment?
Right, I'm Chenoa Stock. I'm a mission coworker with the PCUSA, uniquely based in Cleveland, but working with our partners in Peru, so I get to hang out with these cool people.
I was just in Lima a couple weeks ago.
All right. Oh yeah, exactly, with Cecilia. Yes. So I've seen the seeds planted for this center and seen it develop and seen you come in and just grow it. And I think it would be really helpful as an ender, to just maybe discuss briefly what else the center has done, because I know there have been beautiful things in Alaska and otherwise, and it might be helpful for people to hear what else this amazing program is doing, briefly.
Thanks for the question. It's a small world. I mean, Lima, Peru is far away, but here we are. So Center for Repair, we take an approach that matches the scale and scope of Presbyterian activity. So we focus hyper-locally and on very, very Presbyterian-related things. On one hand, for example, the failure to pay Puerto Rican pastors anything remotely close to what any other ethnic group makes in the PCUSA is something our General Assembly said a couple of months ago. Let's investigate that and fix it. 2 years ago, and we're in the process of complying with a long list of details, but 2 years ago, our General Assembly said, we acknowledge that, and this is the General Assembly's language, not my own, but that people of color congregations who have not had equitable access to funds cannot call full-time pastors and install them. So part of the work of the Center for Repair is to do a whole lot of data collecting and to begin to prepare plans to see how we can either match churches who need funds with churches who have excess funds, or simply begin a program of writing grants so that churches can say, we don't have a pastor, we want a pastor, we don't have the funds, or we can't retire our debt responsibly, what can you do for us? And what we are organizing ourselves to do is to gather the funds so that those churches that can't afford pastors can have those pastors. And right now, that is people of color churches, or people of color majority churches, again, using our General Assembly's language that I'm praying will shift sometime soon to be more specific. In addition to that, Presbyterians have been very active around the world doing mostly good things, but in the case when those things have caused harm, we are active there as well. For example, in the 1820s, people looked at what happened in Haiti and understood that those were the implications for what was going to happen with slavery in this entire hemisphere. And rather than preparing themselves for inter-ethnic democracy, they decided instead to begin a process to figure out how to take free people in this land of African descent and enslaved people in this African descent and ship them to the other side of the Atlantic to become colonists, Christian colonists in West Africa, Liberia in particular. Last year, the Liberia Council of Churches called upon the Center for Repair to please investigate the relationship between Presbyterians founding the American Colonization Society and the civil wars that we fought to get rid of those former slaves, African American colonists. So now we are working with people in Liberia to see exactly what role did the Presbyterian Church play in setting in motion activities that resulted in part in a civil war. We've also begun speaking with people in Latin America and in the Caribbean to see how we can be in solidarity as Presbyterians with reparations movements in Colombia, in Peru, and also how can we join calls for repair coming from the people of Haiti. We're working with the World Councils of Churches and other groups in order to help European-based denominations determine how to help people like yourselves, but in their contexts, begin to respond to the calls for repair and reparations that are coming from throughout the Caribbean, South America, and across Africa. People are willing, but they realize they are starting out on new terrain and they don't know how to navigate a landscape where Europeans are telling their denominational officials that we know you're in the habit of ignoring what the Africans are calling for. We're changing that habit and we need you to change with us. So we play a consulting role in some cases. I'll be in Germany in, I got a few weeks before I get on the plane again. But I'll be in Germany and Hanover doing some consultation. So that calls for repair coming from Namibia and other African countries to former German colonizers, so that those calls can start to make the kind of sense that allow people to say, okay, I think we know how to begin to listen. I think we know how to start researching to learn our responsibilities and then craft language that makes sense for people sitting in the pews. So that's just a taste of what we're up to. There's a lot of other things. For example, I can't forget our friends in Alaska. We went to Alaska as an interagency team with a very large group of people in order to give reparations beyond $1 million, in order to present reparations in excess of $1 million and to offer an official apology, only for me to hear behind closed doors from a tribal official saying, oh, you must come back. That one thing in 1963 is just the tip of the iceberg. So we've recently come back from Sitka, Alaska, and learned many of the things that we need to know in order to understand what Presbyterians did in partnership with the government in the late 1900s, last quarter of the 18th century. In the late 19th century, we learned what Presbyterians did in partnership with the government to intentionally target a group of indigenous languages for extinction, knowing, in saying so in missionary reports, that destroying those languages would scatter the population, move people off of lands that the government wanted available for the military, for fishing, gold, timber, oil interests. That has been demonically successful. And now I am told from linguists that there are a handful of indigenous languages that now have less than 10 master native speakers. And if something is not done dramatically and immediately, those languages will become extinct, unfortunately, according to the intentions of the Presbyterians and the United States government. So those are just a handful of what we're up to. We're only one agency in one denomination, but what we are hoping to do is to spread what we're doing and to also be inspired ourselves by other denominations and, of course, non-faith groups to work together and not to work in silos, so that we can accelerate what we can do to respond to those calls for repair from people who are very much alive and who are very much filled with vivacious determination to meet their ancestral responsibilities, make up for lost time, and move into their preferred futures.
I just want to drill down a little bit on something that Jermaine mentioned. And his first stop here in Cleveland Heights was at St. Mark's Church. And it was a wonderful conversation that was held. And St. Mark's alerted him that they do not have a pastor and have not had a pastor for some time. And they are now making a connection to talk with Mark and see, Jermaine, what he could do to help them. And in that sense, I'm going to talk to Gordon, who is of the Presbytery, and you know, it should be a local effort. And if we can't solve it locally, well, then national might be able to help us out with that. But learning that at St. Mark's, I think was just wonderful, and I think what you said to them was wonderful, but I think that has to go to Presbytery, and that they have to help St. Mark's. And if the Presbytery needs help in helping St. Mark's, then go to Jermaine.
So on behalf of Forest Hill Church and the Racial Repair and Restoration Task Force, I want to thank all of you for coming and spending your evening with us. I want to thank Reverend Jermaine for his incredible leadership, and I'm gratitude for the Presbyterian Church USA and in selecting such an amazing leader. So let's give Jermaine another thank you.
to continue as an act of repentance, we wanted to turn your attention to a prayer that's in the back of your packet that you have. And I want to we want to both invite all of our white brothers and sisters to help lead us in this prayer. In addition to this prayer actually came from the predecessor group that many of you out in the audience are a part of and helped to write. So again, thank you to that energy and knowing that that energy continues forward. Though I may not actively participated in slavery and Jim Crow, I acknowledge my sins as a descendant of those who did practice such horrible actions, or as one who was complicit in such activities by silence and inaction, by not calling for justice for all children of God. I, as well as the congregation of Forest Hill Church, admit we are participants in systemic racism today, whether indirectly or directly. Though I or the congregation cannot bring about justice for the past, both I and the congregation can help bring about repair in our society today. Justice is long overdue. Guide us through the Holy Spirit into your will for repair that will bring justice and establish your kingdom here on earth. Amen. Thank you.
Let them eat cake.
Or cobbler.
No, that's perfect. I've been trying to think.